Hello, guys, welcome to this podcast, Everyday Talkies, which ironically does not come out daily. I am Anshul and I talk about random things to random people, majorly about life, perspectives, and thinking process. It's like an interview, or let's say more of a conversation with one or two guests about random topics that interest us. To be really honest, it's just a way to reduce my inhibitions in talking to people. So come join me and enjoy. Hello, guys, welcome to the new episode of Everyday Talkies. It's been a long time since we had Vivek as the guest. The past couple of episodes, we were trying with different series. We have Everyday Trekkies running, we started Book Corner, we started Startup Talkies, and it's been fun, but the love for space never dies, the love for astronomy never dies. So I have back with me Vivek to talk about the same topic. So Vivek, I'm sure this is gonna be one of the episodes like Poop Theory, where we ramble about strange things. But probably there is a overarching topic like rockets to bound us in. What do you have in store for us and for the listeners? What are we learning today?
Firstly, I want to thank you, Anshul. I'm really glad to be back on your podcast. Now, I think after you have, garnered so many listeners, this is actually an honor and a privilege to be a part of this absolutely wonderful podcast. Coming back to today's topic, like there's so much happening in the world of rocket and space in general. I watch hours of YouTube videos just on, different type of rockets and things like that. So I don't think so this episode will do justice to those wonderful videos on YouTube. But definitely we can give an idea to your listeners on where this particular segment of our life is headed towards and how the future will turn out to be.
We have had a couple of episodes where we talked about space, astronomy and things like that in general. I'm sure people liked it and they responded well to it, and even they were interested. This time we wanted to go a bit not technical, I would say, but to the grassroots level on rockets. Like how are we gonna lift up to space? So we'll learn something about that. Where do you want to begin? Like the world is too vast. So
actually the world is quite small when you compare it to what lies ahead for us. Tagline of Star Trek goes, the final frontier. So like the space is the final frontier. After listening to some of the episodes on your podcast, I started watching Star Trek, and there's this one concept that actually stuck with me, and I've been thinking about it for some time. What happens is, like, when you go to a different astronomical body, like if you go to moon or if you go to Mars, like there's two ways in which you can land, and only one way has actually been tested so far, and that is what happens on Star Trek as well. What happens is, in Star Trek, travels the distance of space in a particular vessel, and when they reach a planet, they beam themselves down. Similarly, what happens is humans also use a lander to land on a different astronomical body. Like if you are going to moon, even during the Apollo missions, they had a lander which used to detach from the orbiter, and it used to land, and the astronauts would again hop onto a pod and take off again, and again dock with the orbiter around the moon and return to Earth. That is the general way in which humans have been able to go to different bodies or land on another body. What SpaceX is developing right now is the same vessel which will take them to Mars, will land on Mars. So that is a very difficult task to achieve, because you are actually transporting such a huge volume of people or load or whatever you're traveling, and you'll have to land the entire ship on Mars. So that is a very, I would say, commendable thing to achieve. And obviously when you are trying to achieve something which has not been achieved so far, there will be reservations by people who are actually doing it, but you need to have conviction and believe that we can actually achieve that. Like that is the primary reason SpaceX started landing boosters back on Earth, because what happens is that until and unless you master the technology of landing on Earth, it is difficult to land an entire rocket on a different body. Last week only SpaceX launched the same booster for the 6th time. So like that is a huge feat to achieve.
That's interesting, because when you speak about SpaceX, and I think many people know about a love for that company for sure, they have taken some really good steps. Like they recently had the mission where two test pilots used their rockets to dock into ISS and then landed back into Earth. That was a very successful mission, and they were having a few hop missions after that. So for people who absolutely have no idea, actually talk very simply is, initially what used to happen was that it was a use and throw system. You use a rocket and that's it. it's done. It's done for it.
I would like to interject because like most of the commercial companies used to exist before SpaceX, entered into this market, like ULA or even the Ariane, the group of rockets which are there in the Europe. What happened is they didn't use the booster again, but NASA had this space shuttle program thing which launched about 135 or 30, 135 missions approx. So what happened is they used to reuse the space shuttle. For reusing it, they had to actually kind of change a lot of things in that. They had to refurbish a lot of things, like they had to layer tiles beneath the ship because after once it landed on Earth, those tiles used to get destroyed by the during re-entry because of the heat and the friction which generates when a ship is re-entering. The purpose of NASA was to bring down the cost of rocket launches, but this process actually increased the cost of launching space shuttle, and I think it was the most expensive rockets ever.
Correct. It was, I think, to quote you the exact number, each launch cost around $1.5 billion, and it was the most expensive launches ever made in the history of mankind.
One of the primary reasons why NASA had to kind of dissolve that mission, and that is when SpaceX entered. And what SpaceX does is SpaceX land this booster and design which they have incorporated. It is a very efficient design which enables them to refurbish the booster quickly and launch it again. No other companies right now is doing that.
Yeah, absolutely well said. And you know what? We'll dive more into these small companies and the recent missions and all of that. But before all of that, I would just like to take 5 minutes and just go over the history of space in a very nutshell. Basically, the birth of space race that we had, and tell us how we evolved till now. And I'm sure I'll not be doing justice because I'll be missing out on a lot of new things. But I'm sure Vivek here will talk to us more about the future and the new missions and the privatization of space and all of that. But let's begin with the birth of space race. So the initial remnants or the initial starting happened due to the Cold War between US and USSR, now Russia.
I think we can go back before that, because like if you want to get into space race, like we have to talk about rockets. Like the purpose of which rockets was developed was to send missiles across the continent to a different country. So, like that was the primary purpose for which rockets was developed. So when you think of it, like the purpose for which the rockets was developed, we don't want to associate ourselves with that. But as we all know that any revolutionary breakthrough in technology happened because of war in the 20th century, even in the 19th century. So like that is the origin of rockets. And once the Battle of World War II was won by the US and its allies, what happened was that there was kind of not so much of development in rockets for a few years, but like Russia and US both had to show their power and dominance in the world, and the only region which was left unexplored was space. And that is how the space race started in Cold War.
Basically, the fight for power went beyond the Earth, and initially USSR was leading. You had the first satellite launch, the first satellite launch was Sputnik 1, that was in 1957, and then you had Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space, and most of it I think was taken care by Russia in winning the space race. But then we had Neil Armstrong and his team.
I think before Neil Armstrong, Russia even had a send a probe to orbit moon, and they even landed a lander on the moon before USA went there.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely. I think that is where, as we discussed in, I think the episode where we were celebrating the 51st anniversary of the first moon landing, that was I think the first victory of US, where the president had committed to people that we want to land on moon no matter what the cost is. And that is how we developed the starting of NASA. That was, we started with the Mercury mission, that was a single man mission. Then we had the Gemini mission, the double man mission, and then the Apollo missions, which was a huge success, where we landed people in Apollo 11, and then it went on for I think 12 or 13 more missions. And the best part was in 1975 when the Apollo spacecraft and the Soyuz from USSR and docked and ended the space race. That was I think one of the beautiful moments. You can see that video on YouTube, it's somewhere there. Whatever be the reason, and it's always a good thing that the space race ended there, but somewhere or the other it brought the zeal to explore space with that vigor was lost for I think couple of decades, where like there were developments for sure, but the frequency of missions and the strive to break another barrier was a bit slowed down. I would not say stopped, but because they had continuous missions and they were exploring, they just felt that the need for human missions were not that required. It was too much risk. So there were lots of unmanned missions happening, and no doubt we had the creation of ISS and all of that. So it was absolutely wonderful.
In my opinion, that was actually a beautiful, better thing to happen because technologically we hadn't advanced that much to send humans to a moon or Mars to colonize it, because there would have been a lot of technological difficulties back then. Right now we are better equipped. Obviously in a few decades we'll be more equipped to do that. But right now I think this is a very good point in the growth of our civilization to actually send humans to different planets. They had a lot of unmanned missions because they knew that there's no point sending humans to different bodies to just to research when the same thing can be done by robots. So they landed probes on Mars, then they send orbiters to gas giants like Jupiter and Saturn. Then we had the Voyager mission as well. Apart from that, we also had Cassini, which actually landed a probe on a different moon, on orbiting a different planet. Those developments were equally exciting to me as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a very optimistic way of looking at things, and we surely did explore and learn a lot in that era and are continuing to learn now. In terms of launches, we move on, as Vivek previously mentioned about the space shuttle program, which was the most costliest ones, I think, and it had done 135 launches with $1.5 billion per launch.
It is also one of the most tragic, I shouldn't use the word tragic, but like it was not the most successful rocket development by NASA as well. Because two space shuttle had some failures, and because of which they obliterated mid-air. One was during launch and one was during landing. And in both the instances, all 7 astronauts on board died. Like one happened in 1980s and one happened in late 2000.
Early 2000, I would say. I think it was 2000, 2001, and it was Kalpana Chawla's spacecraft, if I remember. And that was a very tragic moment for all of India and for all of the world. But let's not delve into those things. Things came at a price. We learned it the hard way, but we are progressing fast because finally we have had the whole privatization of space launches. NASA has given permissions to 3 companies to land on moon, being SpaceX, Blue Origin and Dynetics team, and I'm sure Vivek will tell us more about these teams. Sure, this is where we are in present.
What happens is that I'm not mocking it, but I'm just telling the situation as it is on the face. Sometimes what happens is like we don't know what to do, so we just do something, and NASA is actually doing that with the Artemis program. Because when you break down the different segments of this Artemis program,
Vivek, I would like to interject you. Could you please tell us what is Artemis program and then talk about the ring?
So Artemis program is the latest, most important project of NASA, where NASA will take humans back to moon again. What NASA is doing this time is NASA is not developing the entire system. As we see, the example has been set by SpaceX, where SpaceX first used to carry cargo to International Space Station, and then they carried astronauts to International Space Station, and now they will actually carry crew to International Space Station. So what NASA realized about a decade ago, that NASA, being a government agency, won't be as effective cost-wise to develop systems as private companies will be. So that is why NASA encouraged private companies to come up and take contracts to develop systems to launch satellites or take humans to space. Similarly, what is happening in this Artemis program is the rocket is being designed by NASA. On top of the rocket, in the capsule will be Orion capsule. Orion capsule will be the spacecraft or the space probe which will transfer astronauts from Earth to the lunar orbit. Like Orion won't land on moon, and the different components of the Orion is also not being developed by NASA. NASA is actually subcontracted different parts of the Orion to different companies which are developing different segments. So I don't know exact specifics of that. And Orion will dock with a lander around the lunar orbit, and the astronauts will shift to that particular lander, and that lander will take astronauts to the surface of the moon. And the similar thing happened back in the Apollo mission as well. But the only difference was that the entire system was developed and built by NASA itself. So NASA has currently shortlisted 3 companies which you mentioned earlier to develop that lander, and one of that company is SpaceX. So what SpaceX is currently developing is Starship. I'll go into that later. And there's 2 different companies, Dynetics and Blue Origin, are developing landers with the sole purpose of actually carrying astronauts from the lunar orbit to the surface of the moon. But what NASA realized is that SpaceX is developing this Starship technology, which is with the sole purpose of carrying humans to Mars. And so SpaceX needed funds, like it wanted to secure funds from wherever it can to develop this. And so SpaceX just applied to NASA's lander project as well. And I think it was kind of surprising that NASA actually shortlisted SpaceX. So NASA is actually playing a gamble with this because if SpaceX is actually able to develop this Starship and they are able to integrate that into Orion, that will be a huge benefit to NASA. So that is more of a gamble.
Yeah, absolutely. And you never know with the breakneck speed that people are working, the different companies that are popping up from various specters of space, be it even the small things that we don't realize which goes in the back end, from being outsourcing of engines or wings, materials and spacesuit designs and all of that. Everything is cropping up. Everything is redesigned, everything is improved on.
I can give a good example to you on this. I was actually watching a video and then researching into this. I found out that there were 2 companies in Scotland. I think their name was Orbex and Skyura. So they are 2 different independent companies which are actually developing rockets for carrying small satellites and payloads into low Earth orbit. I started, like researching on which are the companies they are associated with, and I thought there might be only a few companies because Scotland being such a small country, there won't be many companies which are actually, into rocket building and that. Once I started, actually discovering there's so many companies associated with these two rockets, I thought I would be able to count them on my fingers, but like I couldn't count them on both my fingers itself.
Scotland is such high in space game. I did not know that.
They have not had a successful launch yet, but there are companies which are developing it. This is exciting because more companies are getting into this, and I think the vision of the Star Trek will be realized very soon.
Oh, that would be absolutely amazing. Okay, moving on from this. So, we discussed about the Artemis program. What other missions or what other rockets are we looking at in the future?
Okay, so like I'll try to break down it into different categories. First, I would like to talk about Virgin Galactic, like the Virgin group of companies. So one of that is Virgin Orbit, which is developing rockets, and I think one is Virgin Galactic, which is developing kind of a rocket which will take humans to space. Like space in the sense that it won't take you to high Earth orbit or even to the orbital level of ISS. It'll take you about 100 kilometers above the Earth surface. That is the border where people in general consider space charts, where you can feel low gravity. So Virgin Galactic have had a few test flights, and they have successfully demonstrated that they would be able to do that. I think the first mission is lined for next year. So they'll be taking, I think, in one space flight, about 7 people will be taken, and that is for general public. Like it is for tourism purpose. One ticket will cost about $225,000. So once I learned about this, like my sole objective of earning is to save for this.
But it would be a nice future where people who have the means can visit space.
They have already bookings in thousands. Thousands of people have already booked it, and I don't think so they'll be able to match the demand so soon. Because like it is in its nascent state, so they'll have to develop so much of spacecraft to take people to space, and there's a limited time in which you can take it. And there's another interesting thing about it is they have built a private spaceport in the middle of a desert in US. I don't know in which state, from where they'll be taking you to space.
Okay, so you mentioned Virgin Galactic as one segment. You mentioned there were 2 other segments. Now what is the next one?
Blue Origin is also doing a similar thing with their rocket New Shepard. So I put it in the category of Virgin Galactic itself. Even they are developing similar technologies. They have actually tested it. The other category I want to talk about is space tourism, where there'll be hotels orbiting space. NASA and different international partners and collaborators with whom they have developed ISS, they all think that ISS is quite old now, and they might dismantle over the next few years in this decade, and they might decommission it. So what they are planning is they'll turn it into a kind of a hotel. The modules which won't be useful for that will be kind of detached, and there'll be kind of balloons which will be sent to space, which will be inflated over there, and that will be attached to the ISS. Like the ISS will be the main model to which different space modules will be attached. So companies actually working on that. So you'll be able to shed, I think, a few $1 million, and you'll be actually be able to stay in space for, I think, a week at a time or something like that. I don't know the exact specifics on what they're planning. They might contract with, I think, SpaceX or different companies which will develop the capability to send humans to space, because a lot of companies are actually building capabilities to send humans to space safely. So like that is also very exciting.
Yeah, and this brings me to a good point. But this will be the first time where people on Earth will be actively contributing in a monetary sense, because like all the space organizations in different countries are all governmentally funded and they're from taxpayers' money, which I understand, like people crowdfunding all of it, but it is not in the amount that we want to receive. Even in India, like we get 10 times less funding than what NASA gets from US, and that is also not that much, like for space exploration, and what that should be spent in a right way. When commercialization of space and privatization of space, it gives opportunities for well-off people to spend on these things, and the profits can go into developing better technology, better means of getting into space, and eventually things will drive down, the cost will drive down, and it will be a common occurrence, and we'll be living in a Star Trek world. So that's actually a good way, because everything starts from this. Like these companies have good motives, people want to explore space, and that is what the intention is from now, but you need the backing of commercialization. You can't just really ignore it and be a purist in that way, because you have to understand business, you have to accept business in what it is and try to earn from it and improve it. That is how I think what Tesla model works. Tesla started with that intention, that they made very high-end models, they earned money from that, now they innovated and they tried to bring new Tesla models for lesser prices for general public. I understand it's still a higher model, but from where it started, it has improved a lot. So I think that is how they're approaching the space missions as well. I think it's a good way that we're progressing. We are trying to be more efficient, we're trying to improve more on costs, and hopefully good future will not be too far. But coming back to the point, the third set of sections that you were talking. So first set we talked about space tourism, Virgin Galactic, and the one from Blue Origin, and then we talked about space hotels. Then what is the third category that you look at?
SpaceX has already signed with a Japanese billionaire. I kept SpaceX for the third category. I'm just talking about tourism right now. So SpaceX needs to earn money because the ultimate objective of SpaceX is to send humans to Mars, and since it is not funded by any government organizations or by government, Elon Musk needs to earn money so that he can actually fulfill this dream of his. What will happen is he'll send humans to orbit moon. Like he won't land them on moon. So he has already signed a contract with one of the Japanese billionaire, and I don't know the cost of the tickets. I think that has not been made public yet. So there'll be 7 seats on that. That rocket will be obviously a Starship, which is the flagship project of SpaceX. SpaceX is investing a lot of resources, time, manpower, energy, everything in developing Starship. So that Starship will have 7 seats. The Starship which will take humans to orbit around the moon. For the first mission, he already has a customer, and that customer bought all the 7 seats. What he said was that he bought 1 seat for himself and the other 6 seats for different artists who won't be able to afford that seat. He want them to take to moon, get inspired from the journey, from actually seeing Earth from space, from seeing moons such up close, that it actually inspired to write some beautiful things for mankind to read or discover in the future. That was his objective.
That's such a noble objective. This is something which I did not know.
It is actually very exciting. I feel it makes me very happy that he has such I would say pure thoughts maybe. So these are very things which actually gives you goosebumps or makes you very happy. I was just hoping that I wish I was one of those artists, but I have no artistic skills, so I'll actually have to earn money from some other way.
So probably now we have 2 ways. One is to earn money and the other one is to become an artist. Guys, please subscribe to this podcast. Just grow this podcast. Probably they'll call me. Thank you, Vivek, for educating us so much about this. This episode contained, we went into our love for SpaceX. We jumped right in, and then we talked about the birth of space race and the tourism industry that we might be looking at the 3 categories of it. We haven't even scratched the surface.
This was actually my absolute pleasure to record this. I think I was actually very excited from listening to this podcast. I don't think so anyone will be able to get my guess my actual educational qualifications. So that is a very happy thing for me, and I hope that this podcast actually encourage someone to explore more into rockets, because I got into rockets recently when SpaceX entered it, and there were so many exciting things which was happening in this particular domain. So I hope it encourages even a single child to actually go into space exploration or build rockets.
But as I was talking earlier, we have barely scratched the surface. There are such new tech that is coming out in the rocket industry. There's such new missions. Then we haven't even delved into what India is doing into it. So for that, keep on listening. Soon that episode will come out, probably in a week or 2, and you'll get to hear about them as well. Till then, thank you, Vivek, for joining us back.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you, bye-bye, and we'll meet you in the next episode.
Bye-bye.
Thank you to all the listeners. I'll catch up with you again soon with someone new and lots of interesting discussions. So, bye.